Hi, everyone. This is Jason Rodriguez with Zpryme. Today, I'm joined by Lincoln Bleavens. He's the Assistant General Manager for Burbank Water and Power, based out of Burbank, California. Lincoln, thank you so much for joining us today. How are you doing?
Doing very well. Great to be here. Thank you.
So, I wanted to start off just with what has been the most challenging part of this pandemic there at Burbank Water and Power?
I think there are a couple of aspects to that. The biggest one really is the nature of the pandemic itself. The fact that we really haven't had a global pandemic like this for 100 years. You literally go back to 1918 and the Spanish flu. So more than a lifetime ago. And so it really, unlike an earthquake or a nor'easter, this is what as I put it, everybody's first rodeo. And I think there is when we look at utilities, we're very ready to respond to disasters. Disaster response is really a function of assessing damage and going out and fixing things and building things. And that is something that we're very ready to do and we do very well at. A pandemic, though, as we're finding, is a completely different animal. It is something, first of all, that a lot of us didn't really plan for or plan for very well because it was such a black swan. It was such an unexpected event. I contrast that here with an earthquake. We are overdue in LA for the next big earthquake, something that we're ready for. But also that pandemics are really unique in the way that they challenge the operating practices, the work practices, even the cultural assumptions around what work looks like. And I think that's especially true in a utility context. Utilities are fundamentally at work sort of enterprises. When I was back in the private sector in the old days, I probably did half my work from home, and that was just part of the environment. In a utility environment, we really think of ourselves by default as in the office or in the shop or out in the yard. And so not only is there a black swan element to this, but from a cultural perspective, most of my colleagues have never really thought about working from home. It's just not a natural part of our DNA as utility people. And I think that extends to the city as well. And we're part of city government. The city, there is a default assumption of working from the office or working from the shop or the yard or the customer service counter. And so for an investment banker or a consultant, there is a flexibility there in the DNA. In utilities, not so much. And that is both culture as well as planning, I think, is what we're finding in the situation.
Okay, excellent. Now, kind of moving forward ahead of that, because there's talked a lot about just being able to be work ready to adjust and perform on everyday duties during the pandemic. But if you can flash us forward a little bit in terms of what reopening kind of next steps for people going out and kind of going back to their lives, so to speak. What are some of the conversations that BWP has been having around that? And can you share any thoughts or plans of what that would look like?
Yes, we've been looking at that. We had the initial, and I think everybody did, that initial shock of, oh my goodness, here's the pandemic. How do we operate in a pandemic context? What we're trying to shift to now from a leadership perspective and a management perspective, at least, is what does the future look like? What does recovery look like? And what do normal operations look like post-pandemic? And I think that has a couple of elements to it. As part of government, we are particularly constrained and sensitive to what the guidance is from the federal government, from the state government, from the county government, what our big neighbor Los Angeles is doing next door. what other parts of the city of Burbank are doing. And so we have to be very, very sensitive to that. But at the same time, we are an essential service. And so we have to think about not just keeping the lights on in the future, but keeping the lights on every moment as we move into the future. So what we're looking at is, first of all, from a load perspective, our loads are way down. The daily shape is about the same, but that y-axis just got shorter. Every day looks like Saturday, basically. And that's an adjustment for us. That's an adjustment for our customers. But then from an operational perspective, obviously LA is in a much better place than the state that I came from, New York. I think we've learned the lessons, and we've locked down very effectively, and we've flattened that curve. But at the same time, we can't assume that curve will stay flat. One of my favorite expressions I mentioned before we started recording, an old samurai saying that when the battle seems finished, tighten your helmet cords. In other words, it's just as that moment where everything seems like it's playing out the way you want it to, where the danger seems to be receding, that is the most dangerous, because people lose their caution, and people lose the diligence in terms of social distancing, in terms of face masks, in terms of hand washing, wiping down doorknobs. So I'm very cautious about the way that we come back. We need to assume that the hygiene and the social distancing is the new normal. And that goes from everything from having field crews arrive at a work site in separate vehicles, to having our call center spread out into empty space elsewhere on our campus so that we get that distancing. And finally, what we're finding, and this has been really interesting to me, when we started the very laborious process of getting people to work from home, we weren't ready for it. It just wasn't in our planning. We had a whole lot of people, and this is very funny to me, who are just clamoring to work from home. And I totally get it. And then within 24 to 48 hours, a lot of those same people were clamoring to come back to the office. Working from home didn't turn out to be this, productive, relaxing, kind of well-lit Instagram thing that people thought it was going to be. And so as we're bringing people back, how do I split up my day ahead staff, trading staff, so that I maintain a contingency? How do I split up my real-time desk from my dispatch desk in my energy control center? How do I send switchmen out to the substations and give them switching instructions without a physical contact? How do we wipe down vehicles and tools and offices as a matter of course, as opposed to just something that we're doing right now? And that's what I'm struggling with, is how do we get back to a normal operations that embeds everything that we've learned and implicitly assumes that we're going to be doing this for a while, even though LA has flattened the curve. We're still going to be doing this for a while. And that's going to be, just to go a little bit broader, that's going to be a real change from that cultural perspective, and from those default assumptions about who needs to be in the office and when. So to me, it's not just a Rubik's Cube, but it's a Rubik's Cube where some of the color blocks change as you're trying to solve the puzzle. So from a management perspective, from a leadership perspective, absolutely fascinating and exciting. And I wouldn't want to be doing anything else. But at the same time, if I had any hair left, it would probably, it'd probably be either gray or falling out at this point. Because so many variables in that Rubik's Cube.
Yeah, I had one follow up there because you mentioned the different departments and the different things you're going through. Um, Particularly if you can maybe shed some light on, how is the field crews doing? Because they're, as everyone has done some work from home adjustments, they got to be out there and diligent while actually implementing some of these things in real time of how you social distance. How is their mentality doing? How have they hung in there doing this?
It's been a great outcome. It really
Yeah.
has. The great thing about utility people is that utility people, I believe, and what I see is we love the job, but more than that, we love the mission. Utilities, I think, are self-selecting for people who want to be out there solving problems and be out there keeping these essential services on, whether it's electricity or water or fiber here. Um, you get those sorts of personalities, and so when you put them in a situation like this, and you give them the tools, and you make sure that they have not just everything that they need to do the job, but everything they need to be safe doing the job, which is expanded now with hygiene and distancing. I've been, I get a little choked up. I actually don't have words to express my admiration for the way that folks have really leaned into this and really said, you know what, the lights are going to stay on. Everybody's going to stay safe. The lights are going to stay on. We're going to go out there and do it. At the same time, though, there have been some significant challenges in terms of, as I mentioned, trying to get two people out of the cab, just have one person in the cab of a bucket truck, have somebody else drive. Okay, how does do we have enough pool cars? How do we compensate folks for taking their own car? All of those things. But it gets down to having fire retardant masks for folks on poles and folks in energized situations. So they've really stepped up, but the challenges, again, it goes back to this pandemic being something that is just fundamentally different, say, than an earthquake. I think of our water crews in holes in the street, and there are a lot of things that they need to do in a 100-year-old system, especially where they simply have to be next to each other. And those are things that we are working out in real time. The thing that's been a real blessing over the last week or so is that at least here in Burbank, here in LA, we seem to have turned a corner, and this is anecdotal, not data.
Yeah.
But we seem to have turned a corner in terms of PPE. We seem to have more availability on masks, more availability on latex gloves. Somehow, and I'm knocking on wood too as I say this, somehow we seem to have turned a corner on PPE. And so getting people together is a little bit easier. At the same time, a lot of the requirements in terms of, if you've been in within 6 feet of somebody for more than 10 minutes, you have to take all these measures. Do you need to quarantine? Do you need to get tested? What have you? So, we haven't solved everything yet, but I keep going back to the person, the human beings, individual human beings that we have on our staff who are so dedicated to getting it right for the community. Under whatever circumstances. And this is not just Burbank Water and Power. This is just, I think, utility people around the world. There's something about us. We're self-selected for service. That sounds a little bit, pie in the sky, but I really do believe that.
Got it. Yeah. No, I agree, and I also applaud the fact that we got to celebrate those victories, and no matter how small they may seem, especially at a time where there's so much change. And it's very excited to hear, hey, turning a corner, that's a big deal. It may not feel like it, but it is.
Yeah.
And so I really appreciate you sharing that and shedding some light in terms of what the good work that's being done there. So another follow-up there is, I think you have also spoken previously about some of that, as you guys being a part of the city, working across different stakeholders, kind of, again, looking forward, what are some of the things maybe off the top of your head in terms of recommendations as we plan for a pandemic in the future? What types of things would you recommend, maybe possibly one or two things we could do better or plan for to be more prepared in the future?
I think that the key word there is plan. And,
Mm-hmm.
we have earthquake plans that are very robust. Pandemic planning. I've done some pandemic planning in my past life, but it never, it never hit the pavement of reality, so to speak.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but one of the things that's so important to me, and I may not be very popular uh, with this opinion, but one of the things that's very important to me is that while all of this is still fresh, and actually while it's going on, we need to be. I'm trying to find my folder. We
Mm-hmm.
need to be absorbing and documenting the lessons learned and
Mm-hmm.
documenting the thought processes. I have a folder, and it should be on my desk, and it isn't, of literally every impactful email and every set of notes. How do we, what have we found when the rubber hit the road with this pandemic, in terms of what works, what doesn't work, where our assumptions, even seat of the pants assumptions, especially,
Mm-hmm.
have turned out to be incorrect. What would we have done differently? And I think it's really incumbent upon the industry, even especially at that moment when we finally relax and nobody wants to hear the word pandemic ever again in their lifetimes. Let's talk about anything. I don't want to talk about the pandemic. That to me is really the key time where we get everybody in a room and we brew a ton of coffee. There's my New York coming out, a ton of coffee. And we capture all of this.
Mm-hmm.
And we just do a data dump, because maybe we'll have a recurrence this fall. I really, really hope not. Of course, nobody does.
Mm-hmm.
But maybe it'll be another century, or maybe it'll be another generation or half a generation. It is really our duty to capture this and make sure that it's not just, oh, so-and-so is around, let's ask them and see what they remember, but that we have really baked this in. That to me is the best thing that can come out of this, is not just a theoretical readiness for the next one, but a true readiness for the next one. And I think that needs to happen at the, within the utility, silos in the utility, within the utility itself, within the city, literally across the value chain.
Okay, thank you. So final question, kind of moving towards a topic that I think you've been working on for a while, and been a big advocate for in terms of where the market's going, and I'm talking specifically about some of the electrification movements there, some of the distributed energy resources, microgrids, and renewables. How do you see that playing out in this post-future that we're talking about? What are your thoughts, and is there any perspective you can offer from Breakwater and Power of some of those key renewable or electrification initiatives?
Sure. It's unfortunately it's not a. I think it's a very bright picture, in general, but there are some very, very dark clouds on the horizon, or right above us, actually, in that. And overall, I see the bright blue sky is that the world is moving inexorably towards a cleaner power supply, electrification across the economy and society, better energy efficiency, better transportation solutions. I see that as maybe not inexorable. I mean, we have to keep it moving, but I see that as the mega trend that keeps going. In the meantime, though, in a pandemic context, there are a couple of dark clouds. One of which is that from a electric load perspective, we're seeing loads and we're forecasting loads that are 3, 5, 10, depending on the time period, percent lower than we had forecast previously.
Okay.
As a result, we're going to have less revenue. As a result, the denominator in our renewable portfolio standard equation is going to change. And all of a sudden, we've just gone from a planning perspective from 33, 34% renewable to almost 40% renewable. Not because the renewables changed, but because the load changed.
Okay.
And that's going to make utilities less, to the extent that we're procuring entirely from a compliance perspective, which is arguable. I think we're doing it because it's the right thing too, but at least that motivation, that RPS motivation, is decreased. When you look at the industry that I came from, the development side of the industry, project finance side of the industry, there are significant layoffs. It's very difficult to get projects done. And because the utilities, the load serving entities, are going to be buying less, there's going to be less demand for projects in the near term.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
So those are a couple of dark clouds. The other one, I think, is from a broader electrification standpoint. We're going to have customers, whether they be residents or small commercial or large commercial or industrial, who are really hurting. And we're asking them, society is asking them, to make investments in energy efficiency, in electrification, in electric vehicles, what have you, that require capital. And we're going to have a lot of folks, especially I think residential and small commercial, who are really struggling, really struggling, and for whom those sorts of investments go from in the spectrum from must-have to nice-to-have. They go way over to the nice-to-have side, and maybe they don't get done. Maybe they don't get done as ambitiously, as quickly. So I think, unfortunately, we're going to see a near-term dip, both on the supply side with renewable, utility-scale renewable projects, but also in the capital investments that are required to electrify and make the economy more efficient. I'm very hopeful, though, that because a lot of those investments have actually become very cost effective, that they move up in the priority, especially on the commercial side. They move up in the priority that that electric vehicles get a whole lot cheaper and the range gets a whole lot longer, so that the ultimate goal being these become just no-brainer economic investments as opposed to mandate-driven or socially driven investments. But I do see a dip in the meantime.
Okay.
We can't avoid it. We have to recover from it, but we can't avoid it.
Okay. Thank you for sharing that, Lincoln. Well, I think that wraps up our time today. It's been a pleasure having you on, and I really appreciate you sharing some critical insights in terms of what's going on there at Burbank Water and Power. Thank you so much for joining, and I hope to be talking to you again real soon.
You bet. Thank you very much.